Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, October 26th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the 2022 Senate elections. With 13 days to go until the November midterm elections, we have so many races to characterize, a lot of changes as a result of new polling data, new fundraising data, a lot of new information that has given us a revamped look at the state of the Senate. We're going to see some surprising new changes in terms of party composition in the U.S. Senate, and it will be a very interesting video to watch, so I'd encourage you to watch it to the end and hear my reasoning out for a bunch of these videos, for a bunch of these calls. But at the end of the day, you can always just go ahead and look at the end of the video if you'd like to, but I would encourage you not to. So altogether, we have 35 Senate races, which is a bit different than what we are traditionally used to. While I'm talking, I'm going to characterize all the states that I treat to be as safe Republican and safe Democrat, just because we really don't need to be spending much time talking about them. But generally speaking, we have about 33 to 34 races. We have an additional Oklahoma seat due to a resignation from a U.S. Senator, so that's something to take into account as well. But realistically, that's not going to be a competitive race, nor was it ever going to be a competitive race. We have 5 retirements from the Republicans in Missouri, Alabama, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. We have 1 from Vermont for the Democrats. Most of these races are quite insignificant in terms of party composition. The Democrats and Republicans are likely going to hold many of the seats that they currently have retiring incumbents, and what you will see by the end of the video is that there will be very little changes when it comes down to incumbent status in many of these states, despite having altogether 6 incumbents retiring across the U.S. Senate. We start off on a baseline, 45 seats for the Democrats, 44 seats for the Republican Party, though we do have some states that we call likely states where we generally know how they're going to go. But they are in a position where if they were to flip, it wouldn't be entirely out of the question, but it would definitely be quite shocking. So 11 remaining seats. We have Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and New Hampshire. Not so coincidentally, all competitive states from the 2020 election, 2018 midterm elections, and 2016 presidential election as well. The last time we had the Senate map was also in 2016. Some of these states weren't competitive, but for the rest of them, they were, and it was just ultimately a very consistent trend of competitive states over the past couple of election cycles that we are dealing with this time around. There's no real shockers, unlike 2020, which had Kansas and South Carolina and Montana jump into the frame after quite significant and popular Democrats decided to enter into the race and make those races more competitive. We're not really seeing that happen this time around. But in a bit of context, we have the FiveThirtyEight forecast before we actually get into our Senate map here, with the Republican Party at a 45% chance at winning control to the Democratic Party's 55% chance at retaining control. In fact, this is the closest the Senate odds have been in quite some time now. Over the past 3 months, the Democrats have been outpacing the Republicans up until recently, where we've seen a consistent trend in favor of the Republican Party, and that has maintained itself over the past week. In addition to that, when looking at the FiveThirtyEight generic ballot, which is just a combination of polls from across the country gauging the public sentiment when it comes down to Democrats and Republicans controlling Congress, we can see here that currently the Republicans lead by about a point. I don't know why it's not showing it to me. I need to head over to the politics section. But what you should take away from it is that the Republican Party is now leading on the generic ballot for the first time in quite some time. That means the Republican Party was down for about 2 months consistently until now, where they currently lead by 0.4%. It's not super impressive. It's not this expansive lead that they had in 2014 and 2010, but it is still a lead nationally when the baseline is that Republicans lose the popular vote to the Democrats, as they did in 2016, 2018, and 2020. So now that we have that all for context, we are going to start characterizing our likely Republican states in favor of their respective parties. Just because Republicans right now are at a deficit based off of our 45 to 44 characterization, we'll start with them right now. The first state that I would characterize as a likely Republican state is the state of Florida. Marco Rubio is on track for a pretty solid victory, as he did in 2016 and in 2010. He started out his election running against actually the Democratic nominee for governor right now, Charlie Crist, who ran as an independent for Marco Rubio's seat back in 2010. Marco Rubio ended up winning by about 20 percentage points across the state. Fast forward to 2016, wins by about 8 points, outperforms President Trump by about 7 points, does very well in Democratic strongholds in Broward County, in Miami-Dade. You start to see where Marco Rubio's support comes, and it has maintained itself through this election cycle. He's polling sometimes double digits ahead of Val Demings, who was once touted as President Biden's potential VP pick. So for right now, the state of Florida is a likely red state. Marco Rubio is on track to win re-election, and truly there isn't much there for Democrats to stop him. As for the next state I'd characterize as likely red is the state state of Iowa. Chuck Grassley is just such a popular incumbent and has maintained a strong electoral legacy. Chuck Grassley is an interesting figure. He was first elected back in 1980 and has won every single Senate election since then for this seat by over 20 percentage points. His most competitive election was his first one when he won by double digits. So he has never really faced a competitive race, regardless of what was happening on the presidential margin. Chuck Grassley was winning re-election, and it looks like that is going to be true this time around. But I expect, and I think this will be interesting, I expect Iowa to be its most competitive for Chuck Grassley. But even then, I'm expecting an 8 to 9 point victory by his campaign. So that brings the Republicans to 46 seats. The Democrats at 45. Now let's characterize some of the states we can characterize. I'm saying that too much for the Democratic Party in their likely column as well. There are a few, actually just one now. I think I'm moving a characterization away from the likely blue column, but that is the state of Colorado, which is going to be a likely blue state right now. Michael Bennet outran Hillary Clinton. He did well in 2010. He's going to win this election. I think that he has built up enough of an electoral basis and groundwork that he is able to defeat Joe O'Dea, who is quite frankly a pretty liberal Republican. I think for Colorado, he makes sense, but for the national GOP, he does not. President Trump has been attacking him. He's really been going against him, and I think there are going to be voters out there. They're not exactly thrilled with Joe O'Dea and might just decide to not vote in this election altogether. I think the margin will be narrower than it was in 2020, but that can be expected with any 2022 midterm. I wouldn't be shocked if it moved down to lean on election night, but I do think for right now, it's being accurately characterized as a likely blue state. So now that we're down to the remaining 8 toss-up races, the ones that will really determine the balance of power, we can start talking about what a lean characterization actually means for these states. And a lean characterization is one that I would say tells us that a state is going to go in one direction or the other, but that it could very well, or quite frankly, easily flip to the opposite direction if time permits. And I say that because we are 13 days until the November election. By the time we reach the day before the election, a lean state should probably be going in that direction unless something dramatically changes or we are significantly underestimating or overestimating certain political parties by the time we reach election night. I think lean characterizations are ones that should not be taken to an extreme, but I think they are trustworthy as we get closer to the election, and they are going to start to mean a lot more than what they do previously. So right now, 46 to 46, let's start out by characterizing the lean Republican states and move through those because there are quite a few, to say the least. We'll start off with the state of Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson is running for a third term. Now, he originally was not running for re-election. He said in 2016 if he won that election that he would not run for a third term. He went against that decision and decided to run for re-election. He was encouraged by Mitch McConnell, encouraged by President Trump. And we can see here that he is doing quite well. At different points in time, I wasn't exactly super thrilled at the idea that Ron Johnson was running for re-election, not on a personal basis, but in terms of looking at electorally. I do think that another Republican could be outperforming him, someone like Paul Ryan or of that sort, maybe someone who's more in cahoots with the national GOP. But regardless, I think Ron Johnson has a lot of baggage, but I also think the Democrat Mandela Barnes does as well, and that's enough to weigh him down. Mandela Barnes at different periods of time was leading Ron Johnson in the statewide polling data, but is now being trounced 5 to 6 points after the Republican Party funneled tens of millions of dollars into the race to paint Mandela Barnes in a negative depiction. And guess what? It worked. The state of Wisconsin right now is one where the Republicans are quite on track to win their election, win re-election from this state. Ron Johnson has lucked out. First elected in 2010, won re-election in Trump's victory in 2016, and now is up again in a red wave year, or at least what is expected to be a red wave year. Wisconsin is one that I would characterize as a lean red state. The next one I would characterize is the state of Ohio, where I think the Democratic Party has a good candidate. Tim Ryan is A tier at the very least, but I don't think that the partisan composition of the state is going to allow for a Democratic victory, regardless of candidate quality. I don't disagree. J.D. Vance is a very poor candidate when it comes down to this race. He is not someone that I personally would run if I was running the NRSC. If I was Rick Scott, I would have fielded somebody better. But quite frankly, the voters chose him, and that's what the Republicans have to deal with. But at the end of the day, as much as they quote-unquote have to deal with it, Ohio is still going red. Practically anyone they nominated would have won this race, but the problem lies in the fact that Ohio took $30 million away from other competitive Senate races. $28 million was allocated and removed from Pennsylvania, Arizona, New Hampshire a month ago by the Senate Leadership Fund, Mitch McConnell's PAC, when it comes down to electing and re-electing Republicans to Ohio to elect J.D. Vance. That would not have happened should J.D. Vance had been a better candidate, and maybe there will be down-ballot ramifications that will be quite significant as we look across other states that could have used the money slightly more if Democrats end up winning them by less than a point. The next state I would characterize as lean Republican is the state of North Carolina. I think at this point in time, North Carolina is one that has been consistently out of reach by the Democratic Party, and quite frankly, I think at some point I might end up moving it into the likely Republican column, though Sherry Beasley is someone who has electoral experience. She did lose in 2020. She did outperform President Biden, but she's going to need more than outperforming President Biden than what she did in 2020 because that resulted still in a loss statewide. I think there's a possibility that she could surprise everyone, but we're talking less than just a few percentage points. You're talking less than 5% at a chance of that happening. North Carolina right now, I would say, is pretty solid for the Republican Party. That brings us down to 5 remaining races: Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. We have our own lean Democratic states. The first one I would say is the state of New Hampshire. I think right now it is fair to characterize as a lean Democratic state. Before it was likely, I've seen the narrowing up, the tightening of the race. The Republican Party is reinvesting in New Hampshire. They pulled out of it. They pulled $6 million out of the remaining budget from the Senate Leadership Fund. Other funds, that $15 million that was originally spent on New Hampshire was pulled out as well. And now Republicans are deciding to reinvest as a result of new polling data that is telling us New Hampshire is competitive. It's definitely going to be a close race to watch, a lot closer than it might have been a month ago. And for right now, I would say a lean Democrat characterization is where I am most comfortable characterizing this race. As for the state of Georgia, I think I'm going to go out here and say that I think a lean Democrat characterization is not too far out of the question either. I think Warnock right now is in a quite interesting position where he's running against a scandal-plagued candidate who is surprisingly doing very well across the state. I think a lot of that has to do with Brian Kemp's electability and carrying Herschel Walker across the finish line, in addition to the fact that Biden only won the state by 0.2%, which means that the Democratic Party advantage is not exactly strong. If anything, it's marginal. So looking at Raphael Warnock's victory in 2021, a 2-point victory versus Biden's 0.2, sure, it's an outperformance, but it's not exactly that much more, which means the Democrats are still going to be playing against a red wave year. Regardless of who the Republicans nominated, that Republican likely was going to do well. The question is, does Walker win? I personally don't think so, but I also would not be shocked if he did. The Democrats also have to enjoy the luxury of the state of Arizona being a lean blue state. I debated making it a tilt Democratic state because Kari Lake is doing quite well against Katie Hobbs, but I also think that Mark Kelly individually is just a strong enough candidate to overcome the potential Republican victory on the governorship. Right now I have Arizona going to the GOP on the governor level, so while Katie Hobbs very well could lose that election, she's the Democratic Secretary of State running for governor in the state, Kari Lake's victory I do not think will be enough to carry Blake Masters across the finish line. This is not a situation where you have a very popular Republican. It's sort of like a lesser of two evil situation where voters are preferring Kari Lake over Katie Hobbs versus states like Georgia where Brian Kemp is consistently getting over 50% of the vote. So Arizona right now, I would say, is lean blue. So that brings us 49 to 49. Final 2 states, Nevada and Pennsylvania, the ones that we have been hyper obsessing about over the past couple of months. And you can see my most recent ratings have Pennsylvania as a blue state, Nevada as a red state. These are states where we have been watching them quite closely and in some cases have disagreed in terms of their characterizations. The last time they were both Democratic states on my prediction, though, was, let's see here, I believe, when is this? August 19th or September 19th, 2022 was the last time I had both Nevada and Pennsylvania going blue. I think a lot of the data that I've seen from Nevada isn't exactly indicative of a Catherine Cortez Masto victory, but I also recognize that historically Democrats are underrepresented, underexpected in the state of Nevada when it comes down to polling data, and also a lot of the new early voting data has actually been Democrats doing better than they did in 2020. It's a little bit of a silver lining, and it's what we get out of the state of Nevada, which has transitioned to be an all mail-in ballot voting state, which is one that I think, looking at the early voting numbers, Democrats should be at least somewhat optimistic. It's not a race that they are going to lose automatically by any metric whatsoever. I will say the Republicans have maintained an upper hand over the past couple of months. Adam Laxalt is probably one of the better GOP recruits of this cycle, but I want to come back to it because I think that will be the state that we really, really need to talk about. But the state that I'm going to characterize next is going to be one that I have been waiting to see how this race was going to go, depending on fundraising, depending on polling data, depending on a lot, including a recent debate that occurred last evening in the state of Pennsylvania. John Fetterman and Dr. Oz faced off last evening in a debate televised by local television, national television. It was one that everybody was expecting to watch. And the reason was because John Fetterman is recently recovering from a stroke that occurred last May, or this past May. A lot of eyes on his health and his ability to serve in the U.S. Senate has really been a forefront issue of this campaign. And the Oz campaign really has not been lenient whatsoever, and last night's debate was indicative of that. I think as of right now, the most comfortable characterization I have for the state of Pennsylvania is a tilt red characterization. I think Dr. Oz was one of the worst GOP nominees of this entire election cycle. I understand that on some fronts he comes across as moderate, but I can guarantee you nearly to an entirety, if Dave McCormick was the nominee, the Democrats would not have invested in this race nearly to the extent that they did. In fact, the polling numbers would have been significantly better. Dave McCormick, while still someone who doesn't exactly hail from the state of Pennsylvania, being from Connecticut himself, does not come across as opportunistic as a TV personality such as Dr. Oz, who quite frankly does not know the state as well as John Fetterman as the incumbent lieutenant governor. Dr. Oz in himself is an opportunist, and that can be recognized on a nonpartisan level, but at the same time, voters do not seem to care, and the data from the state also seems to tell us that Oz is inching closer and closer to Fetterman, and at this rate, by the time we reach November, he will likely overcome him in the polls, unless last night's debate changed something in favor of Fetterman, but quite frankly, I do not see that to be the case. Watching that debate, seeing the highlight clips, seeing what the Republicans are now using in ads, the Democrats also got some good amounts of information out of it, but on the same front, I think Pennsylvania right now is a tilt red state. And Democrats are, going to be in a less fortunate position because the last time I had Pennsylvania as a red state on my Senate map is going all the way back to January 1st, 2022, in my first ever prediction of this election cycle this year. So we've come nearly all the way around back to Pennsylvania being a tilt red state. Quite an interesting characterization, but one the Democrats are not going to be happy about. So in the final state I want to characterize, the state of Nevada, where I am going to give the Republican Party a tilt red characterization, thus giving them the Senate majority for the first time in months. And the reason why I say this is because Nevada's early voting numbers are better for Democrats. They indicate an outperformance of what they did in 2020, but not enough to convince me that Adam Laxalt will lose this Senate race against Catherine Cortez Masto. A lot of the data is saying that Nevada is going red, that all of these states, quite frankly, are going red. Democrats hold out in New Hampshire, Georgia, and Arizona, but we cannot deny the shift in favor of the Republican Party nationwide, statewide, and across many key and competitive House, Senate, governor races all across the country that will benefit the GOP in every single way possible. Nevada has Adam Laxalt, Pennsylvania has Dr. Oz, Ted Budd in North Carolina, J.D. Vance in Ohio, Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. Though Republicans do lose Arizona and Georgia and New Hampshire, they got what they ultimately wanted, which was the Senate majority, but between now and November, I could imagine that changing as well. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.